Good evening, everybody, and welcome to OBI's public talk on AI in brain health advances. So I'm Francis Jeanson. I'm the head of the Center for Analytics at the Ontario Brain Institute, also known as OBI. Thank you for making it. With the time change, it's not easy for everybody. And if you're looking for the emotional support group for the Blue Jays, I think you're in the wrong room. But this room is definitely the right room for learning more about AI and how it's having an impact in health and discovery about neurological conditions and how do we address them. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered in Takaranto, the indigenous name for Toronto, meaning the place in the water where the trees are standing. We're on the traditional territories of many indigenous nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, this land is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are grateful to live, work, and learn here, and we affirm our responsibility to engage in the spirit of reconciliation. As an organization focused on brain health, OBI continues to learn from Indigenous knowledge systems, especially their holistic view on well-being, which considers the deep connection between mind, body, and spirit. Our 2025 to 2026 series, Breakthroughs in Brain Science, celebrates OBI's impact on Ontario's neuroscience landscape and our growing role in global brain health innovation. Tonight, we explore how artificial intelligence, or AI, is unlocking the groundbreaking insights into brain health, taking us beyond what we once thought was really possible. Since 2010, through our team science model at OBI, which brings together researchers, clinicians, technologists, and those who have lived experience with brain conditions, we're helping accelerate innovation and having real-world impact, improving the lives of the 1 in 3 Ontarians with a brain disorder. But before we begin, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Daniel Zikovits, a self-described AI evangelist, to offer opening remarks. As Director of Digital Innovations and AI at GE Healthcare for nearly a decade, Dan has led the development of AI solutions transforming healthcare across Canada. He also serves as an advisor on OBI's Analytics Advisory Committee for many years now. We were just chatting a bit earlier. And there's no one better, really, to show how AI is defining the next frontier in brain health. So thank you, Dan, for coming.
So I've got a very short time period here. So welcome, everybody. It's really great to be here with you tonight. And as Francis mentioned, I'm the Director of Digital Innovation and AI, which sounds pretty exciting. And it is really sort of the non-traditional, what your grandfather knew General Electric as. It's a complete new area that we've kind of delved into. And I wanted to take a few minutes this evening just to talk about the exciting time we're in right now with AI, the intersection of AI, academics, startups, companies like our institutions like Ontario Brain Institute that can bring to the forefront a lot of this technology for treating mental health, looking at mental health and mapping of the brain. And we were talking earlier, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this, but we're starting to move into 2 exciting areas that I just want to spend a couple of minutes on this evening, and that is foundational models and federated learning. And these may sound like kind of weird terms, but the first one is foundational models. We've been developing these in the imaging space, but we were talking earlier with some of the scientists on the panel about this interesting article in Nature Papers that came out recently, and it's a ChatGPT-like model of the brain. Now, it is the mouse brain or mice brain. It was developed. What's really interesting, though, is it did some segmentation on its own beyond what it was instructed to do. And so now we've got these models where we can start to look at anatomies and part of use them for neuroscience. And then couple them with models that we've developed at GE in the imaging space for things like MR, CT, X-ray, ultrasound. So when we start to map those together, we can look at new molecular markers. And I won't go into too much depth. I usually give a whole kind of lecture series on a foundational model. But essentially what you do is you use a huge corpus of unstructured data. And we're talking about this model was able to map 13 different segments of the brain If we look at ChatGPT, it's literally billions and it's growing every day. There's probably, what are we at, 15, 18 billion by now? So this is a very small introductory piece to AI within anatomy and neuroscience. And you start to couple that together. And then the last topic, this federated learning, is where you're starting to send the model to the data, and something we're working closely with the Ontario Brain Institute and a lot of startups. And that's very interesting in the healthcare space. And particularly if we're starting to share data across different borders, it becomes even more interesting. And so where these two technologies become super interesting is getting large corpuses of data that are disparately located and then plugging them into these foundation models. And so just to simplify what a foundation model is we can put in large unstructured data sets into these models and train them up to identify all kinds of different patterns. And a lot of these are healthcare or neurology patterns. And what's interesting, we can fine tune on specific areas like Alzheimer's and other areas. And what's really, really interesting is the model can then come back to us and say, you fine tuned me on these 3 areas. Here's 5 other patterns you didn't tell me about, and these are super interesting. Do you know about these? And you can start to, these models are more like ChatGPT, so it's not like we need 100 PhD scientists to set them up. In many cases, you can start to have conversations with them. So I want to leave you tonight with the future of healthcare, and particularly in neuroscience, is at the intersection of some of the bright minds that we have here, institutions like Ontario Brain Institute, and large multinationals like GE, NVIDIA, and some of the large players within this space. We're truly going to evolve AI to help patients, particularly focused in Ontario, of course, but then actually my role goes globally. So we're looking to take these Ontario technologies that we've developed here and then push them out globally. So welcome, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so I'm going to take my seat to welcome the panel. But before I welcome the panel, I will say a few introductory remarks. So again, thank you everybody for making it tonight. I hope everybody found the place okay. We have a really lovely venue here. So I'll be moderating the panel over the course of the next hour. We'll have about 35 to 40 minutes of discussion with the panel. And then we'll follow up right after with some questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, if you're online, you'll be able to see a chat box on your computer. You can submit questions there. If you're here in person, you can raise your hand and the team will come and see you and collect your questions. We'll then compile those and I'll be able to then ask our panel your questions afterwards. So stay tuned for that. There will be a QR code, by the way, I think shown on the screen, where you can use your phone and the app to submit your questions as well. So tonight, we're exploring how AI is cracking the code of brain health, literally. I think you'll see our panelists are a really exciting group of individuals working on the cutting edge of using advanced techniques in analytics and AI to better understand the brain, how to better understand brain disorders, but also how we can predict them and treat them. And none of this would really be possible without the help of the Center for Analytics. We're really here to help support startups and labs innovating in the space. You can think of us as a mission control for brain health and discovery. We have the technological know-how to work with different types of data, like brain scans, genetics, cognitive data, and combine that with AI and advanced computing. And we're providing these resources for the labs and startups to really help with these discoveries and innovate. Ultimately, our goal is to help better detect, diagnose, predict, and even potentially treat disorders for anybody with a brain condition. And I think what's really happening in this era is we're shifting away from a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to addressing brain conditions to a much more precision health approach, which is really trying to understand the individual conditions of each person, every one of us, if we happen to have a brain health condition or if one of our loved ones have a brain health condition. How do we better understand how our bodies work, how our brain and our health is connected, so that we can address those in a much more specific way and much more appropriate way for the individual. So this is very exciting, and I think you'll hear from the panel tonight about methods that are employed to achieve that. So now I'd like to introduce our panel, and we'll start with inviting Dr. Ehsan Amjadian from Ophthalmo Corp. He is the CEO of Ophthalmo Corp, who are using AI to detect optic nerve damage. Ehsan, welcome to the panel. And next, we'll invite Dr. Clement Ma, who is a biostatistician at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, CAMH, designing AI-powered clinical trials that deliver faster and more reliable results. Clement, thank you for joining. We'll then invite Dr. Nardine Samuel. She is the CEO of Cove Neurosciences, which is creating AI software to advance brain analysis. Thank you, Nardine, for making it. That's great. And last but not least, Dr. Ati Zarabadi. She is the CEO of AimSense, who are really revolutionizing stroke care with portable brain imaging technology. Thank you, Ati, for making it. Perfect. So really, we have a terrific group of experts who are really taking us beyond sort of the next frontier of leveraging AI and data analytics for brain health. So thank you all for being here today. So I'll start with really kind of the fundamental question about understanding what the specific problems that you're each sort of addressing and tackling with your innovation. What are the challenges and the gaps that you've identified and that's driven you to develop your innovations in brain health using AI? So I'll start with Nardine. I'd like to start with you. I know you've been working on some really fundamental technologies to better measure how the brain functions. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things about neuroscience and brain health is that unlike other areas in medicine, we don't have very good ways of measuring brain function. For example, if a physician gives you a medication for a neurologic or psychiatric condition, how can we really accurately quantify what's happening in the brain? Many of the tools that we use in the clinical setting are quite subjective and not really biomarker based, and contrast that with other things. So for example, you can measure your blood pressure, you can measure glucose, you can measure cholesterol or blood-based biomarkers of oncologic diseases. And so our goal is really to figure out how we can create biomarkers of brain function and use that to not only power diagnostics, but also help with measurement and assessment of response to therapy for medications related to brain diseases over time.
That's great. Thank you, Nardine. So Clement, I'll build a bit on this concept of measurements, which is actually a real challenge. So how are we sort of in this space? I know you're working around the design of better research tools to create to better test for treatments. Can you tell us a little bit more about those challenges and what you're doing?
Definitely. Thanks, Francis. So I think our main goal is to move away from treating patients kind of as, everyone gets the same kind of treatments and move towards where we can use biomarkers that can predict whether a certain treatment could work for one individual versus another. And these biomarkers can be genetic biomarkers, imaging biomarkers, other clinical measures that we measure from the patients. And we try to use AI tools to predict whether that specific treatment could benefit that individual. And once we've built these biomarkers and we have good biomarkers available, the question that we're trying to answer is how do we incorporate these biomarkers into clinical trials when we're trying to test new treatments for different diseases like Alzheimer's disease, depression, different mental health diseases.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you, Clement. So that's a good segue. Now moving a little bit from the clinical trials, Ehsan, I'm going to ask you a bit about bringing that research and that innovation to clinical practice, which I know you're working a lot on, especially in the domain of eye care. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing with Ophthalmo in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the spirit of the challenge, really, the biggest challenge that we have that does also happen in the eye care space is speed and accuracy. We live in a space and time where time is of essence. And currently, as it stands, the data streams that are currently helping the doctors and physicians for diagnosis, prognosis, or even treatment are in a way disjoint. And that's how the traditional machine learning or AI was set up to do. Now with the advent of LLMs, that could really change and integrate all this data. So the data, the types of data that we deal with are, OCT images, fundus images. These are, different types. Some of this you'll see later on in a slide. Ways of capturing images of the eye, the retina, and the nerve head within the eye. So merging all of this information efficiently and make it accessible to the clinicians. Whether it's for diagnosis, prognosis, or treatment, is really the goal of ophthalmo. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, a big challenge in digesting a lot of that data efficiently and accurately.
That's correct.
Yeah. That's great. Well, moving on a little bit with Ati, I want to ask you a little bit about, you're addressing this critical situation with, stroke, which is often in the context of an emergency where every second counts. Can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing with AimSense?
Absolutely. In a stroke care, we often say time is brain. Every minute that the stroke goes untreated, nearly 2 million brain cells die, increasing the risk of permanent brain damage, disability, or death. The current standard of care are CT scan and MRI that are well established and advanced. However, they are for the most part stationary, they're very bulky, hospital-based, and they are very expensive. So at AimSense, we are developing a portable brain scanner that can do the imaging at the point of care. So by this, if someone in a rural area has a stroke, we are saving that critical time to treatment.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Ati. So now we have a bit of a background on, what you've identified as a challenge in each of your domains, but we should dive a little bit deeper into the technology and how it actually works. And how do you actually apply AI and data analytics in what you do? So maybe Ehsan, I'll start with you. I know you have you're a very integrative approach. So how are you actually leveraging AI in the sort of the technology that you're employing for eye care?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as mentioned, there are various types of data that are taken into account once a decision is being made, and physicians and in particular, optometrists, your primary eye health care provider, and ophthalmologists look at your data holistically. They will not take a look at just an OCT image, and that's the optical coherence tomography images that they just project light to get layers of your eye, and it really helps. You see, that's the one on the left. The top image for left at the top, that image is a healthy macula, and the bottom one is the one with a glaucoma, which is a blinding disease, right? So you need to see those layers. So that's just one example. However, there are a lot of diseases that share such symptoms. And in order to make, as going to the earliest point, accurate decisions and accurate diagnosis, they need to look at the data holistically. So you have the forms that the patients fill out. You have their chief complaints that they mention to the doctor. Their physical symptoms or their behavior also is telling. And this is not just for the damages to the optic nerve. It can also be reflective of systemic diseases. So with optic neuropathy, it could be indicative of conditions like MS. That is a systemic disease. As they say, really the eye is a reflection of your entire body. So really merging all of that information. Top right is, by the way, a fundus image, which is a different mode of imagery. It's like just a normal, what you can take with your camera. Merging all of that information natively within the language models and helping the doctors with diagnosis, prognosis, treatment is really the goal, to speed up and make sure these decisions are made accurately. The previous approach was, as I mentioned, very disjoint, where information did not successfully propagate. So, but that's only on the functional side. You get some icing on the cake, which is now you can query, not as a doctor, but as a clinician, you can query your images. You can walk through the reasoning behind the language model, detecting a biomarker, right? So that's also the plus.
Yeah, that's a big new step, and I think we're seeing this in AI in general, the ability to sort of explain what's happening and query the model and understand more about how these automated systems essentially start to make the decisions or make the the reasoning steps that they make. Yeah, it's
Highly
fantastic.
invaluable. Like that's really what's the multimodality
Right.
bringing,
Right.
To the table,
Yeah.
which I'm really excited for.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, Atsi, I'm going to follow up with you next to dive a little bit deeper in that technology and that where AimSense is really leveraging now AI to develop what you're doing.
Our technology uses electromagnetic waves to scan the brain. On their own, these images are relatively lower resolution compared to the detailed brain images from CT scan and MRI. So we use the AI, and AI enables this technology, regardless if it is an EMT or a portable MRI, because now we are also using the ultra-low field MRI to make MRI available at the cost of the resolution, for example. So when we are making the devices portable, there is a compensation for the quality of the brain image. So AI comes into play, and it plays a key role in enhancing the quality of the images in real time. So using this technology, we are using thousands of brain images to help us with not only making the brain images sharper, also helping with the distinguishing between different types of stroke, if it is ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke, and also detecting any sort of abnormalities. So we are bringing the hospital-grade imaging of the brain to the patient bedside or even in an ambulance, even before the patient arrives to the hospital. In emergency cases like a stroke, it's really critical.
Yeah, this is really exciting technology. And we can think of the different regions around, thinking of remote places even around in Canada or other countries where this could be of tremendous value.
Yeah, especially in a white country like Canada, there is
Right.
only one mobile stroke unit in Alberta, and it's because it is not financially viable. And it is very unfortunate that we do not have the technology yet that can send to the patient for on-site imaging. But with
Right.
AI-enabled technologies, it can be possible. It is the future that's coming.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Okay, Clement, I'll move on to you. We want to ask you a little bit more about how you're using AI and data analytics in your in the ways in which we can sort of predict treatments and ways we can better select patients and work with patients for identifying the right treatment. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah,
work?
definitely. So I can give you an example. Right now we are working on trying to develop a new platform to help clinicians who are developing new treatments to design better clinical trials that can incorporate these biomarkers that we discover. So the platform is called Accelerating Mental Health Precision Trials, AMPT, and it has two main parts. So first is we have a tool that helps investigators explore data from the OBI brain code platform, as the data set we're using is called from the CanBind study. This is a depression kind of cohort study. Patients have been followed longitudinally. They've been treated with different treatments, and we know their outcomes. So from that data set, we're using both AI models and statistical models to try to predict based on a participant's characteristics, their sex, age, other genetic imaging characteristics, to try to predict whether a certain treatment has a higher or lower probability of working. And in this tool, what we're trying to do is build this algorithm using AI and then also allow, have a kind of a visualization tool so that individual investigators around the world can then go in and explore this data set. And once the investigator has found a biomarker of interest, a subset of characteristics that may be predictive of treatment response, then what they can do is use the other part of the study where they can now incorporate the biomarker into the trial design itself. So for example, instead of enrolling all individuals with depression, you may decide to restrict your enrollment to those with that biomarker. And that hopefully will increase the potential effect of the treatment versus a control treatment. And that way we can reduce the number of patients that we need in our trials and also increase the likelihood of success in our trials and deliver specific treatments for our patients.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Much more targeted.
Very targeted, exactly.
Which just speaks back to a little bit that point I made earlier around, this movement that we have towards precision health. And this is, I think, a terrific example. And I think a good segue is asking Nardine actually a little bit about the work that you're doing. You're dealing with this massive brain data, highly interconnected. Can you tell us a bit more about how you guys are leveraging AI and these advanced techniques in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it builds very well on what Clement was discussing, because we're trying to build the very same tools to put it into the hands of people that are developing these clinical trials. And so exactly as you said, if we can enrich the populations for clinical trials to select the right patients so that, for example, you're not doing a trial for Alzheimer's patients and it's completely heterogeneous, and some patients are very mild and some are, more severe, or maybe even the underlying pathology could be a little bit different. And so we, as I mentioned, we're very focused on multimodal analytics with also a very strong interest in a tool called EEG, or electroencephalography, which is widely used in the clinical setting every day to measure brain waves and brain activity. Primarily used in epilepsy, but as you can imagine, it can enable us to decentralize clinical trials. So there are headsets that patients can take home with them, and you can measure your brain waves, and we can harness that data to assess response to therapy over time. And I think that's the power of this incredible era that we're living in, where we have access to this technology, where we can generate this type of data, and then in turn have the tools to be able to analyze it and create and develop and discover biomarkers.
That's fantastic. Can you tell us a bit more about the types of data you've used related to this?
Yeah, definitely. So when we first started actually here in this very same complex, I also work here as a resident and see a lot on the stroke side as well, and which is why I think, again, all of these modalities are so powerful. We did a lot of work using a tool called MEG, or magnetoencephalography. And to Ati's point, this is something that's really not very easily accessible. Like, as far as I'm aware, I think there are only 2 in Toronto. And it's a very highly specialized approach. And so it allowed us to learn more about managing difficult types of data and large complex data sets. But then how could we apply that to other ways in which we can collect data that could be more accessible to the general public? And EEG is not perfect, and there are a lot of problems with EEG data. It sounds really great that you're measuring brainwaves, but it measures other stuff like muscles and blinking and things that may not be as relevant. And so that's our job, to try to figure out how we can improve the assessment of signal to noise in these contexts, and really make the most out of access to these types of tools.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Nardine.
Yeah.
Super. So I'll shift gear a little bit, and we talked a lot about sort of the background, the challenges you're facing with your companies and the labs, the technology, and how you're leveraging AI. Let's talk a little bit about your vision for kind of the future, where you see, especially in the context of what you're doing with your companies and with your labs, as being the future. Where are you seeing sort of the future for applying technologies like AI in what you do over the next 5 to 10 years? So it's a question for all of you, but I'll start maybe with Clements, if you could comment on that. Where do you see the future being?
Yeah, I think it's very exciting to hear all the work that's trying to discover markers of outcome, markers of brain activity. And I think my hope is that as we build out a lot of these tools, they will get integrated into clinical practice. So an individual who has depression, they'll come into the clinic, and instead of the doctor deciding what that best treatment might be for that person, they might receive a questionnaire or take a some kind of genetic test or some kind of imaging kind of test, and trying to predict which treatment might be optimal for that individual. And hopefully with that, with that technology, we can then better treat our patients and ensure that the treatment that they get is specific for that individual.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. So I'll pass it on maybe to Ehsan, if you can comment on that concept of the future. What do you see the future being, especially in the context of ophthalmo and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question because in 5 to 10 years, I can really go nuts on sci-fi and tell you what I really want to happen.
Sky's the limit.
And it may not be all too ambitious. Because we have seen that, especially the AI technology has really moved at really light speed in the past few years. So really the hope is, our motto is that a world where everybody sees, where everyone sees. And it's not that far-fetched. Glaucoma or AMD or optic neuropathy, as I mentioned earlier, these can be caught earlier, and they can be slowed down, moved to treatment. A lot of times, they're not really, caught in time. Either people miss their eye exam or they're not informed about the importance of it. So really, that's the hope, to catch that early on, and then later on, with a couple of technologies that are really developing and we're monitoring them closely. One is a neurogenerative approach for the optic nerve to regenerate the damaged nerve. So that is particularly helpful for glaucoma. If I haven't mentioned earlier, glaucoma is a blinding disease. So if it's not caught early and managed, it will lead to blindness. Hopefully we can, have a cure for it at some point. It gets even more important with optic neuropathy, and or that with the links to more systemic diseases such as MS. Imagine us being able to kind of prevent that. So really that's one. Maybe I'll quickly mention the other approach that I think is very promising. For diseases such as AMD, age-related macular degeneration, there has been approaches where they plant a chip inside the at the center of your retina. There was a few years ago there was a similar approach with a little bit of an eyesight, but unfortunately the technology went bankrupt, the company behind it. But there has been a new study or a new approach recently that will bring back eyesight and make that connection back to the nerve head. So the future is bright. Really, the hope is for us to have a world where blindness is not an issue anymore.
That's amazing. Yeah, the future is bright. No pun intended, I think. Yeah. That's fantastic. Okay, Ati, I'll move on to you and ask you a bit about what your vision is for the next 5 to 10 years around really leveraging AI and these technologies in your space.
We are working towards a future to democratize brain health care through portable brain imaging. So it is it can be way better than today. So, for example, having a helmet-like device inside a regular ambulance, or like in a small hospitals, remote and underserved communities, everywhere patients can access to quick and accurate brain scans. So that means we can have lower the disability, save lives. So that is the future that I can see. It is coming.
That's really exciting, yeah. Such an important, so much work to do, but a huge opportunity. That'd be fantastic. So Nardine, I'll pass it on maybe now to you to talk a little bit about your vision and where do you see the future lying in the space of leveraging these technologies for the work you do with Cove Neuroscience.
Definitely. So, You know, on the clinical side, that's exactly what I foresee, that the way that we practice medicine for brain health is not going to be the same as it was 10 years ago now that we have access to these amazing technologies. I'm not a psychiatrist, but for example, on the psychiatry side, you know, being able to give patients medications for depression and or, you know, other mental health disorders and not saying, you know, see you back in 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks to see if it works or not and up titrate and managing side effects. What if we can actually measure the potential response, you know, on a more real-time basis? And then on the neurology side, which is, you know, my area of passion and interest, is early detection, and it's everything that you guys have mentioned. You know, if you can have a window of insight into the brain through the eye, which is the only nerve that you can see. I love always telling patients that fact. You know, and you can have early detection of things like optic neuritis for MS, or, you know, enriching clinical trials. Again, as you said, on the stroke side, it's the way that things are now, it's very difficult to envision how patients get good quality care when you're not close to a large tertiary care center. And for the work that we do at Cove specifically, you know, imagining a world in which you can do, you know, a series of tests and say, this is the likelihood that you're going to develop Alzheimer's in your lifetime or Parkinson's disease. And not only just having that information and saying, and we can do something about it. We can try to prevent it by, you know, either giving this medication or suggesting this intervention or something to sort of attenuate the risk of these neurodegenerative diseases if we can detect them earlier.
The early detection is so important. Yeah. I think you brought it up quite a bit. Okay, fantastic. This is really exciting. I think we want to first, you know, thank you all for your insights so far, but you're not done. Now's the chance for the audience to ask some questions. And so I'll use this handy iPad with a chance to get a sense for what all of you, either virtually or here in person, are curious to know a little bit more about. So let's see, we have a question here about you know, most of the AI models being used right now for psychological disorders. They've been trained on specific tasks and that also been tested on the same task. And the reason for not having a model to generalize is a lack of data. So how do we think we can face this problem of lack of data leading to, you know, models that don't generalize really well? Does anybody want to tackle this? Clement?
I'll start, but I'll rely on everyone else. So I think, you know, definitely all AI algorithms, machine learning algorithms, rely on large data sets. That's, you know, instead of trying for the, you know, human investigator scientists to prescribe a model, you know, a hypothesis, the AI is trained to detect patterns in the data. So it relies on a very large, comprehensive data set. And I think the audience member is very astute. You know, this is very key that we have the right data to you know, generate these models. We need to both build the models, but also validate the models, right? In independent data sets, ideally. We need diverse data so that there are not inherent biases, right? If all the data sets are from a certain geographic region or of a certain type of individual patient, you know, there could be certain inherent biases that come out from that prediction. So I think in terms of data, I think, you know, I know OBI has done a lot of work with building out the brain code platform and trying to, you know, bring in data sets from different institutions, different settings, and harmonizing them in a way that can be utilized for training, for building out these models. And I think we need more. We need more data sets that, you know, are well established, are good quality, and I think, yeah, I think that's what I would suggest.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Clement. Does anybody else want to comment on that, or? Yeah,
I'll just add very, very briefly. I'm not going to repeat. I 100% agree with what was mentioned, but just want to point to what Dan earlier mentioned with techniques such as federated learning, where, you know, a lot of the restrictions in the you know, in the health domain is not so much as the data doesn't exist. Rather, it's, am I allowed to share the data freely? And techniques such as federated learning of OBI, understand, and GE has been invested in it, will enable that technology for later on. The other point I'd like to point out is, you know, not to diminish in any way the value of how critical data is. Data is absolutely critical. However, with the advent of foundation models, we have noticed that the learning curve has really become, really much faster for the new tasks. Really, that's the whole premise of foundation model, is that with much less data, you can get up to the same level of accuracy. So I just wanted to kind of mention that as well.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Ehsan. Okay, maybe I'll move on, unless other comments, we're okay. I'll move on to, I saw this question around, are there any concerns about the black box approach to AI and not being able to fully understand how it arrived at its conclusion or its results? Are there any comments on that, on this challenge sometimes with AI models? So for those of you who are maybe not be familiar, AI models are often thought of being a bit of a black box because essentially they're very complex sort of representations of relationships between all these data points in this highly, complex numerical sort of, network, essentially. That's what we call them, neural networks, as you might have heard. And so they represent this very complex, association between all these nodes and edges that are very hard to decipher, but yet they make these really amazing, inferences, as we call them, or decisions. So you provide them with a bit of input, and it gives you a really nice classification about this or that, or gives you a nice prediction about a number. And it's often bewildering. How did it come so accurately at this result? And yet it's very hard to sometimes pull it apart and understand. However, I know there are some techniques that have come up, but I don't know if anybody wants to comment on this idea of how do we deal with the AI as a black box challenge.
Yeah, I can comment on that. Yeah. I think about this a lot, actually, because I feel like we were sort of trained in an era where everything was very explainable, but we were talking about things like linear regression, right? So, if your blood pressure is high, your stroke risk is going to get high, and that's a direct relationship. And so that's great, but that's not really explaining all of the other factors that go into play for your stroke risk, including genetics and diet and exposures and other things like that, right? And so on the one hand, explainability is very important, but on the other hand, we also want to know how things are in health. And I think that, the body is complex and health is very complex. And so we may not have all those answers. And so obviously, as you mentioned, there are, areas like explainable AI and things like that are trying to address these issues, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. And so, if a model performs well and it's telling you this is the structure of the data, that's the structure of the data. And, we have to sort of, sometimes I'm in awe of, the science behind it. Our job is not necessarily to try to figure out ways to understand everything. It's very humbling. Maybe we can't understand everything, but if we have tools to be able to at least give us resources that we can help improve patient care, I think that's you're winning in that case. Yeah.
That's a really good answer. Great. So this interesting question here around how long until regular people can access the types of technology that these researchers, I think what you guys are really working on. I know, and this person, yeah. And I guess how you're especially curious about ophthalmology and portable MRIs. How will this be available for everybody, and in what context maybe will these technologies be available? So I'll start maybe with Ati.
Yeah, I can take that. So a portable MRI is already in the market. So there are not many of them, but we do have, and there is like the different clinical indications for using these portable devices. And when I speak about the portable brain scanner, I see the portable MRI more of maneuverable rather than portable. So with this electromagnetic tomography, which is a cutting-edge technology which has not been commercialized yet, there are a few companies in the world that own this proprietary technology, including AimSense in North America, that they are doing their clinical validations. There are promising results, promising evidences that this can work, but it's gonna take like a decade or so to bring it to the market. And there is a lot of barriers for the technology adoption, for example, like developing the technology, validating it, and having the clinical trials and everything, and being accepted by the medical world and being practiced as a new standard tool, that is also another story. So short answer, it is coming in the next decade or so.
That's great, Ati. Ehsan, did you want to comment on that too?
Yeah, I'll be happy to. So, our technology is utilized by the clinics. It's a B2B sort of model. And the way I think everybody will be able to feel it is, spending less time waiting for their appointment. They're referring to the clinics are going to be, maybe they don't have to go back for a certain visit or to double check a certain condition. Just the accuracy and speed really is how, the kind of general, and how individuals would feel it. How the clinics would feel it is that really their flow will be much, much, much smoother, much faster and much more accurate and much more automated. So that's really how. If you don't mind, I'd like to shed a bit of light on what was discussed previously regarding AI models. And one of them is not controversial. The other one is a little bit controversial, but I feel confident enough to say it. So really, what's not controversial is that there are ways that you can look at these neural networks. Yes, they are convoluted. You can't. It's very much by design, actually, very much akin to humans' brain, because long story short, we were able to look at nonlinear complexities of our entire world, be it visual, be it auditory, and it is nonlinear. That's why linear regression did not survive. Ironically so, neural nets are built on regressions, right? But that said, is that you can look at what we call saliency maps. You can look at a single neuron, right? Much akin to what they did in the first place with electrodes, right? And you look at animal's brain, and you can look at the activation pattern of that cell. So you can see, for instance, what portion of my brain is being activated when I'm doing a certain thing, which, in legal cases they use for, to detect intent, for instance, right? So there are these methods. So that's the controversial side, is that it's even more accessible to human brain. So when a physician makes a decision, it's not really that easy to kind of probe that cell and really understand the intention. It's very complex. Now, the premise that of our technology is not to take over that decision making. We do believe that how our society is set up, really that belongs to the physician, and so that's a second layer of defense, right? So you can probe it, but you can also it's always filtered by that physician's world knowledge and expertise. So I think those are the two ways they can kind of make sure it's helpful but not damaging to the society.
That's great. Thank you, Ehsan.
Yeah, of course.
We had a bit of a question around, I think I saw earlier, related to sort of the importance of preparing data sets for like within the context of your model and your analysis, and how important is it to prepare that data? Clement, you touched a bit on this. Do you want to expand on that, and then maybe I'll ask Nardine?
Yeah, definitely. We're not feeding like raw data. There is some level of processing so that we're measures are standardized in some way. We're calculating scores. We're cleaning up missing data, but it's integrated. We're harmonizing across different types of databases. Maybe one hospital is measuring it in this way, another hospital is measuring it this way, but in order to put into the model, they need to be harmonized. Or one institution is using this type of database, another institution another database. Again, there's some level of harmonization before it gets into the model. So definitely that's an important step. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, thanks, Clement. I don't know if Nardine, you want to speak a bit to the data pre-processing, like the importance of that?
Definitely. I mean, it's absolutely essential. And, specifically not just with regards to multimodal data, but even single mode. So if you're looking at EEG data, as I mentioned, that's something that we've invested a lot of time trying to improve on. You're using different devices, and there are different sort of technologies, or even the same device utilized in different clinical settings. And I think the key thing to know is that the output of your analytics pipeline is really only as good as the quality of the input. And so you need to ensure that your data is high quality in order to have good quality outputs from that.
That's great. There's actually a question related to, I think, what you just said and earlier describing Cove and what you did around the standard pipelines that you were developing. I think they were unsure what you meant by standard pipeline. Did you mean something that had more to do with like cleaning and removing artifacts, or actually the pipeline that would actually make a decision on, some sort of inference on the AI side? What are the standard pipelines, I guess, that you're developing?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is both.
Both.
So, we've done a lot of work on the pre-processing side, and then we've done a lot of work on the deep learning side on the other end of that. Once you have high quality data, how can you garner insights in terms of biomarkers and things like that? And, given our background, we were very focused on ensuring that the work that we're doing is highly scientifically rigorous. And so we publish this work in peer-reviewed journals to demonstrate transparency in the approach as well. And I think that's very important, when we build these types of algorithms. And I think you mentioned this as well, not just developing a tool, but validating it on external data sets as well, to ensure that it's, high fidelity and high performance.
Right. Yeah, so important. That's great. Okay, related to the data quality piece, but a little bit different. This is more related to data privacy. And we had a question here more for AimSense and for Ati, related to how do you actually deal with the sensitivity of the data and this component of data privacy, sharing and recording this data. How do you handle that data?
That's a very good question. Actually, the cybersecurity and the data privacy, once it comes to the telehealth, it is of higher importance, because if you want to transfer the data, if you think about remote imaging and doing it in an ambulance, for example, and then sending it to the server, so you need to have strategies in place to be sure that the data remains secure. And that is a main piece of the regulation, to make sure that the patient's data is remain secure and safe.
That's so important. Thank you. I think that helps build those assurances around how the data are managed and ensure that, that's so important. Thank you. Okay, we have maybe a question a bit more broadly for anybody who'd like to address it, but more around the current AI-driven approaches that you're familiar with to detect diseases in the early stages. We alluded to this, but are you familiar with anything being used right now that's helping in this space? Not only what you're working on yourselves, but maybe from other colleagues or other domains. Does anybody? Yeah.
Yeah, I can start off with that one. So again, I'm in the neurology space, and there's a lot of work that's being done, for example, with some of my colleagues and exceptional startups locally and beyond, looking at things like speech recognition patterns to detect, or to sort of provide a window of insight in terms of early detection for neurodegenerative diseases. Actually, a lot of ophthalmologic applications and changes in eye movements. And visual changes and things like that. So I think that, sort of gathering what I would call maybe ancillary clinical data, that is very large scale data that uses AI-based approaches. And these are very successfully being employed across multiple settings, including the clinical trial setting today. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. That's great.
I can add, previous to joining CAMH, I was in the oncology space, and one of the very exciting development is using AI tools to diagnose different types of cancer. And you would feed in, for example, pathology slices, images of slices of a tumor sample. And given the different stains of different agents that the pathologist would generally use and view it under the microscope, and then diagnose the type of cancer. Now, training up AI tools to do that visual image analysis is actually very impressive. And I think, I'm not sure if it's prime time yet, it's been rolled out, but definitely that's coming. And it'll be a great tool for pathologists. I mean, obviously not perfect, but it becomes part of the toolkit for the doctors
Right.
to use.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I'll add to that as well, radiology. So, tools that are, subspecialties that are very amenable to application of computer vision approaches. And they are being used now, including here in Ontario. And so I think there's another one, another company that I'm familiar with in the dermatology space where you can sort of scan a piece of your mole. What is this? Because ultimately this is visual pattern recognition. And so I think these specialties that are amenable to computer vision approaches are very exciting, and they're evolving at a very exciting rate for sure.
That's great. So there's a question here that's related to, I think, to the space around, sometimes we don't know if AI is making up things. And there's a bit of that uncertainty. I think it comes a lot from this space of, if folks are familiar with, generative AI. And it became especially apparent with these, language models that we chat with, like these chatbots with which we have conversations with, and sometimes make up things, or they hallucinate or confabulate, depending on how you like to describe it. So, how do we address that? Or are there, in the space of health, this could be a big concern, of course, if we start to generate, false results or false diagnoses or false predictions. Are there safeguards that you think we could put in place that will help us sort of address this? Ehsan?
Yeah, I'd be happy to take that. So, and we've gotten better as the technologists in the area. The LLMs, how they were trained, just for the audience, is all they're really main what we call objective function. How they're actually trained to do the amazing things they do. And LLMs, it stands for large language models, where they generate. So if you have conversed with ChatGPT or basically any commonly now known AI tool, Google has it in their search, Bing has it in their search, that is an LLM behind it. And how they're trained is that it's learned to generate one word after the other. So, and if it makes a mistake, so it reads an entire book, for instance, or the entirety of internet, and it just looks at the next word. Did I get the next word right? Good. Go to the next one. So it's a generative, algorithm that generates linguistic output. Now, there is no guarantee in that design that it's going to be truthful. Right, in the original design. Nowadays, they've integrated into the objective function, cost for saying things that are not, accurate. So that's one way. And another way is now from the users of that technology perspective, there are only a handful of companies that actually have the capital to build those from scratch, those large language models. However, for the user ones, for the user, from the user's perspective, there are methods such as RAG-AS. RAG is, what does it stand for?
Retrieval
Augmented generation. And ANS, honestly, I do not remember at the moment. But that technique looks at the triangle. So it's a RAG-AS triangle. You have the query being made, so the question that you're asking the language model, the response that's being generated, and the reference that it's using to generate a certain response. And by looking at each side of that triangle, you can elicit, is it truthful? For instance, the side that goes from the reference to the response generated, you can say, was it truthful? And from the query to either of those, you can see how relevant it was. So that's one way that you can control and raise the flag if it goes out of bounds. So, and a little bit on the technical side, but there are ways to measure and control for hallucination.
That's great. Yeah, thank you, Ehsan. Yeah, very interesting. This is, I think, an important piece and there's clearly a path, I guess, to help support this.
Yeah, and I'll just add very quickly, and that's only one method.
Right.
There are, a few other also very potent methods.
That's great. Okay, so there's a question here around whether it's possible to use AI to understand how new technology, like transcranial magnetic stimulation, is actually working to treat depression and OCD. So it's more on the, OCD, mental health side. Yeah, Clement?
Yeah. So I think we can, so RTMS is a brain neurostimulation technique where an individual suffering from obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, or depression, they can receive stimulation at some frequency, several days a week, over several weeks, and that's been shown to improve mental system by modulating brain activity. So in terms of applying AI, I think maybe the question is asking like, how do we understand what's exactly happening? So that I think that's more linked to like imaging. So as you're doing the stimulation, afterwards you would probably want to do some imaging, EEG analysis, and what brain activity has been modulated by the stimulation. So I think tools like what Nardine has said could be applied to try to understand the biology. Now, I think AI is only a tool. We still need to do our lab science, preclinical sciences to try to understand the biology of this. And there are, we do understand some of the pathways that are being modulated, but obviously it's a very complex network in the brain, and definitely, more work needs to be done.
That's fantastic.
I agree, and I do feel compelled to comment since this is my specific area of clinical and research interest, that I've done a lot of work in TMS and focused ultrasound as well, and that's exactly what we do. So we basically try to couple these interventions with actually outputs such as MEG when I was describing my MEG work earlier, or EEG, and so that provides us a window of insight into what are the brain networks that are being activated when we utilize these approaches through different patterns and different stimulation parameters. And it's very exciting. And the other thing I want to comment on actually, sort of related to the previous question, which is that we're saying a lot of really positive and exciting things, but we do have to be very careful because it's true. These technologies are not perfect, and it's important to be very cautious about the implications that incorrect or inaccurate outputs can have on patient care, on clinical trial outcomes. I mentioned earlier, what if we could predict that someone could develop Alzheimer's earlier, but what if it's wrong? And so you have to be very careful in developing biomarkers in terms of sensitivity, specificity, and accuracy. So these are important things to think about.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, getting it wrong would really
Yes.
not be good.
Yes,
And
exactly.
we want to get it right. Yeah. So there was a question here around, sorry, I think I had it here. So yeah, there are different aspects of diagnosis and decision making. Is there any aspect around this decision making in the healthcare context that you think cannot be replaced by AI? You think that would be maybe very challenging at the very least? Does anybody want to comment on that? Are there areas where you think AI will not be able to help, or is really quite unique to the specialist?
I
Ati?
can take that. Yeah, I believe AI is an enabler, at least for the next few years. So it's not going to replace anything, it's going to complement. So it empowers the technology, and it maybe in the future it becomes perfect and it can be a standalone physician, for example. But right now we see it as something that can make the work more efficient. So it is helping the physicians, providing more information to make a better decision. So it is, as I said, it's something complementary at the moment.
So really working together between the AI and the specialists.
Yeah, and it's
make
making many things feasible. That's like, I don't think it can be like replacing the human work, but it is kind of making it, empower it and making it more efficient.
That's fantastic. Does anybody else want to comment on that? Or?
I would just, I couldn't agree more. I totally agree. And I think that, people are always saying things like, oh, AI is going to replace radiologists or pathologists or whatever. It's really not. I think that if you can embrace this technology, it can only make our work much more efficient. But at the end of the day, you can't replace a human being. And even these concepts of neural networks are based on the human brain, which is not replaceable. And being able to talk to a patient and contextualize their disease in terms of who they are as a person and what they do for work and what their hobbies are and what other medications they're taking and other comorbidities and things like that, computers are just not going to replace that. But again, we live in an exciting era where we have tools that can help us do our job way better and probably way more efficient, than we did a decade ago.
That's great.
I mean,
Very,
very quickly. I've been outspoken today, but what I would say, I give an example of in the field of computer science. I think that can contextualize it. Back in the day, you would look at these light bulbs, and you would imagine what machine code it would stand for, and then that would be your algorithm, right? It was painstakingly difficult to write an algorithm, and even after that, you had these punch cards that you had to write it, and then it would go to a machine. Only then you would know you have to wait in queue. It doesn't happen immediately. Maybe after a few days, you know what you wrote and did it actually result. Nowadays, it's instantaneous. As a computer scientist, do I want to go back and look at the light bulbs or use the punch cards instead of? There is layers of technology, that's for sure. But do I want to? So that's how I contextualize it. Technology will keep evolving how we do things, and so far it's been has made us more efficient. In the medical setting, these are all the devices that are being used. Imagine how many lives are being saved on a daily basis, every second, because something was detected thanks to technology. Yeah. And really, I echo what was mentioned earlier as well. Like it's not here to replace a human being. It's here to help us move faster in detecting and hopefully treating. So it's a tool.
That's great. Yeah, absolutely. Building on top of what's been built so far and enabling us to go much beyond what we were able to do before. Yeah, it's a great point. There's a really good question here. I like it because it's about collaboration. And this is really at the ethos of OBI. I almost suspect if it's not somebody related to OBI. So the Ontario Brain Institute was really built on this foundation of enabling collaboration amongst researchers, patient communities, industry partners, to really drive forward our ability to innovate in the research and in neuroscience and better understand brain disease. Collaboration is really at the essence. And so there's a really good question here. So what are the kinds of international potential collaborations that you think that in the future will help us advance AI in brain health? Do you see this as being something that will be a big enabler? We're talking about enabling and building on, but will collaboration play a big factor in this?
Maybe I'll start. Yeah. I currently work on a number of clinical trials that are spanning across Canada, with Europe, with the US, and I think, we all already collaborate. Like a lot of the work we do, companies in academia, we really rely on our partners abroad and in other institutions, because they're all bringing different expertise. And I think AI can really enhance that because, we humans are good at the collaboration, but we can use the AI tools for prediction purposes, to be more efficient in our work. One very, maybe simplistic example would be just simply translation, right? I'm trying to launch a clinical trial in 3 different countries. I want all the materials for the participants to be in 3 different languages, and that already can be very helpful to translate that. Some of the behavioral therapies that we try to develop with our European partners, they all need to be translated because the psychologist that's delivering that therapy is speaking Dutch or German or Spanish. So I think it will increase the efficiency of these collaborations.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's great. Okay, we're getting close to time, but I did want to ask this other question from the audience, which I think is a really nice way to wrap things up. I will ask you a subsequent quick question afterwards, but this is the last from the audience. So what's the next big breakthrough in neuroscience we might realize using AI? This is the moonshot.
The top one.
The top one.
I mean, it's easy for me. I can just state mine.
Yeah,
I've
sure.
already indicated.
Sure.
What I was thinking thinking about.
Yeah, so no,
Everyone.
no blindness, really. Really, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I'll be very brief because I went on to, in depth earlier on, really detecting it, so no blinding eye diseases. And then if that happened for any reason, right now, especially nerve damages are irreversible, for us to regenerate it. And it's not that, it's not impossible. It happens as of now in some animals. We just need to learn how to do it. As we learned how to kind of crack the code for intelligence with AI or flight with airplanes. So I think we will do it. Yeah, so that's my moonshot.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else? The moonshot?
Yeah, I'll add.
Yeah,
So,
Clement?
measurement is very difficult in mental health space,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we talked
I
about it.
can't image someone and know if they have depression. I can't draw their blood and know if they have an anxiety. It's relying on patient-reported outcomes. They're filling out, validated scales, and they work, but it's subjective, right? So I'm super excited about when, trying to develop like measurable markers of these diseases, right? And if we can objectively measure these markers, that will transform the clinical trial space, because now we can actually measure this biologically in some way, right? And that to me will make, it will revolutionize the way clinical trials are done and really accelerate the development of the therapies.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Nadine? You're
no.
in? You're in?
I mean, I'm all in because I'm a little bit biased. It's what I do. But yes,
Yeah.
and that's exactly it, right? And when we first started out, our pitch, was, we have a couple of members of our company here, but, our pitch was always like, I would show all these 5 MRIs and say, which of these MRIs shows a patient with depression, or and the answer is they all look the same and they're all normal. And so, obviously structural imaging alone is not sufficient. So yes, I have a sci-fi idea where, you go to your family doctor or your neurologist or whatever, and they measure something and they tell you, this is your risk of developing this disease, or this is your response to this antidepressant, or something along those lines. Exactly the same as people take home a blood pressure monitor or something like that. And I think it's necessary for us to advance science like that, because we have those tools, we have these resources. We're very lucky to be living in this era. And so, I think we're well equipped to maybe, have this future where it's not so sci-fi. Maybe it is realistic.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Ati, did you want to add to the moonshot?
Yeah, actually, Nardin mentioned the structural imaging. So I think the transformation that is happening is both on the functional side and the structural. So the imaging, like what we're doing at AIMSense, is more focused on the structural malfunction of the brain. You can see any, for example, clot formation, any bleeding. Also, like getting information from how the brain function and the brain activity. Those combined, they can make a huge difference. So when we're talking about bringing different modalities and analyzing them, so it would be a more comprehensive understanding of the patient. So I think that is what can transform the way we look at brain diseases today.
Fantastic. Great. Yeah, moonshots it is. And I think we're very optimistic about it. It's great. I want to, before we close off, I did want to ask each one of you, we have a few minutes left, just if you could share 30 seconds roughly each, just what is the take-home message that you'd like to share with the audience today? So maybe we'll go in the same order. Ehsan, do you want to start?
I'm sure. I may sound repetitive. Really, we imagine a world where blindness doesn't happen, and we start by doing this. Capturing, any markers early on, so we can intervene, and hopefully later on we can reverse the order. Really, that's the hope.
Yeah, fantastic. Clement.
Yeah, I think for me it's really developing personalization for treatments of mental health disorders, and really identifying these biomarkers of treatment response and then applying them to clinical trials to make them more efficient so that we can get these therapies quicker from the scientist's lab to the bedside. That's really the goal.
Amazing. Nardine.
Yeah, so for us, it's really envisioning a future where brain health is certainly personalized. And I think that we are definitely there because no two people with a brain disorder are the same. And if we can figure out better ways to measure things, we can diagnose better and we can treat better. And I think the era is now for precision neuroscience.
Great. Ati?
Yeah, I think AI making things feasible that was not possible before. So it can make brain imaging accessible and affordable, which can democratize the way the brain health care is.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to welcome everybody to thank our panelists today for the great discussion. Thank you very much for joining. And I'd also like to thank you all, the audience here today, for joining us in this conversation. I think we've had a very engaging talk overall. Don't forget, we do have resources that we're going to be sharing. There's going to be links, I think, displayed on the two screens. We do have a great website developed by our team on the braininstitute.ca website with access to resources, especially a link back to these public talks. As you may know, we have the OBI public talks every few months. I think it's every 3 months or so. And so stay tuned for upcoming public talks. We do have one coming up in March that will be on innovative treatments for brain health. So we'd love to have you there. Feedback is also very important to us. So if you have feedback, I think there's a link with one of these QR codes. If you can take a snapshot and provide us with feedback, I think there may be also a form that's available as a printed copy. We'd love to hear about your ideas, what you'd like to hear more from a public talk like this hosted by OBI. And that would be, I think, something that would be really helpful for us to refine and improve on. I think we've shared, these public talks, just to emphasize, they're really designed to share the latest knowledge on brain health and to offer tips on how to both manage health and wellness. So keep that in mind. Your feedback will really help us design these in the future. So once again, thanks everybody for joining, and thanks our panel, and have a great night.